says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell Gillard!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me to break down the week that was in the NRL, as well as all the news that's happening in the code, are my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, good to have you on. And Sixties, it's not been so long since we last recorded, mate.
Yeah, it's funny. It seems like only yesterday.
Clint, how you doing, mate?
I'm feeling absolutely top notch after a really great performance from our side yesterday, gents. It wasn't perfect, but we managed to get the job done. So riding the high of a win, and hopefully that we can do the same going into this weekend.
And John, just before we get into thanking our sponsors and hitting our news team stinger, if we can just give a quick shout out to our good mate Rob. Rob has obviously he's had a tough time with the passing of his mother, and he's much loved by everyone on the Cumberland Throws. So we just want to send out our wishes to Rob, and we'll see him on Saturday.
Well said, mate. Well said. All right, so let's shout out our sponsors like you mentioned, Sixties, and that's obviously Big Swing Golf, Northmead, and star partners Narellan, Auburn, and Parramatta. Helping make the tip sheet happen each and every episode. There we go, got there. But for now, let's get into the news.
News team, assemble!
Yes, fellas, it's only 24 hours since the Bulldogs match. A great victory. Anytime you have a win over the Bulldogs, we're always happy about that. But what's our takes now on where both teams are at? Clint, I'm going to throw to you first of all. First of all, your takes on the Bulldogs and where they're at, and also where our mighty Eels sit.
Yeah, the Bulldogs are in a bit of a precarious position at the moment. It was interesting through the coverage of the game yesterday, the Fox Sports commentators citing that they believe that the Bulldogs should be probably sitting a bit higher with the talent at their disposal. I think they're sitting exactly where they should be, and exactly about where I aim. I think in our preseason predictions where they would be, look, there's obviously some quality players within their squad, but in terms of the balance within that squad, they've still got some holes to fill within their roster. And I thought our boys put in a very professional performance yesterday, and even missing quite a few first graders of our own, I should say, we're still able to handle them pretty comfortably. At no point during that game, despite the fact that they were throwing the ball around with what before the line looked like some attractive footy, but was pretty easily handled by our defensive line. In the end, it just felt as though that we were in control. And even though we're far from perfect ourselves, I think our completion rate was about 68% or something within that vicinity. At no point in time during the match did I ever feel like, this is going to slip away from us. We felt in control from start to finish. And when I consider, I guess where we are in terms of how our season is building, well, we're finally level with 7 wins and 7 losses. We've won 3 on the trot, and starting to look pretty decent. And I'm pretty happy with where we're going. However, noting that there's still much growth to be had, and many players to be welcomed back to the team as well.
John, what about you? Your thoughts on where the Bulldogs are heading this season, and of course our Eels.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Bulldogs, and the first thing that really came to mind for me was that Robin Williams Jumanji meme where he jumps back out of the ball game and goes, "What year is it?" Because the last 5 or 6 years, it's been the Dogs' year every year. Best recruitment drive, best young coach. They had Trent Barrett, who obviously, as a head coach, struggled with the environment at the Bulldogs and is now doing great things at Parramatta as an assistant coach. But they went out and got the best new young coach in Cameron Serrato this year. They had the best recruitment drive. The media were falling over themselves of how important Reid Marnie and the rest of the collection of players they'd signed were going to be for the team. And yet here we are, halfway through the season, and they're back in spoon contention. And I'm sure at some point in the years to come, they will hit a critical mass of recruitment and find the right coach. And maybe Serrato is that coach, because I don't want to knock him too much, because being a head coach is hard, especially as a rookie in a rebuild. All those factors make it difficult, but it just feels like the media are so desperate for the Dogs to be good that they keep hyping them. That's what made me think of the what year is it meme.
Yeah, and without going into a Reid Marnie bashing, what have we learned about Reid this year, Clint?
Well, I don't necessarily want to suggest that he was purely a systems player. I think that's a bit disingenuous and unfair to Reid, because he has shown glimpses of some really great individual play for the Bulldogs this year. But in saying that, he was very much a player who's been a benefactor of our success for the last few seasons, and was able to, excuse the quote, cash money in on it, and he's taken them. Well, good luck to him. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't want to be at the Eels, then that's fine. We as Eels supporters want players to wear the blue and gold and represent Parramatta, and Reid decided he wanted to go over to Canterbury, and well, good luck to him. But you reap what you sow, and the deal that he made was to be in the position that he's currently in. And I think there's probably another season or two yet for him to experience with that, and I think long term, that's going to not just hurt his market value, but also any aspirations he had towards rep football moving forward. So, yeah, look, he's, as I said, he's had some really good individual moments, and certainly some things that make a highlight reel and look flashy at the end of the year when you go, what did that player do this year? But it's ultimately about the team and the team performance. And if he's going to be taking on that leadership role, if that's what's going to be bestowed upon him, then they're probably going to, and Reid himself are probably going to want to achieve a bit more moving forward.
John, I remember there was a statement in commentary, or perhaps it was in an opinion on, say, something like NRL Tonight. Maybe it was Blocker. I'm not sure if it was Blocker, but it went something along the lines of Reid Marnie taking the Bulldogs to new levels this year.
Look, like you said, you don't want to be Reid bashing, and like Clint said, he's had very good moments, and I think by and large he stayed true to the player he was as the Eels. There's been moments of real sparkling offensive play where he's leading the competition 40-20s, I believe. He's had some great ball playing, always backing up. He's got a relentless motor. High defensive involvement, but that comes with a propensity to make errors and overplay his hands in attack, and given his frame, the opportunity for the offense and the opposition side to bully him defensively for missed tackles and ineffective tackles. That's what we've seen from Reid this year. And the difference is that at Parramatta he would have his great moments and we'd love it, and then he would overcall the halves and we'd get frustrated. At Canterbury, he'd have his great moments and they love it, and they're in a different position where their expectations aren't as high as Parramatta fans, so they're more willing to forgive mistakes, which is fine. But he also hasn't got a good spine around him to be frustrated at his overcalls. Burton is not a halfback. He's a good player, but he is not a halfback. Carlo Wapu, great young player, not a halfback. These are guys that are willing to be the sort of second in command, I suppose, or the back seat when Reid wants to take over a game. And that works out well for him. It works out well for the Bulldogs in the short term. But the reality is, and we've seen it for the Bulldogs, talking about how much they've underwhelmed, they desperately need a halfback. They are a team that can put on sparkling passages of play, much like what Reid does. But for consistency, they are just lacking massively.
No genuine game management that you can see out there. And probably to that end, we're seeing, I think, Reid Marnie trying to be more of the game manager, almost in an attempted Cameron Smith type role, that's not really his bag. The one thing I would imagine that Reid has brought to the Bulldogs would be a work ethic, and they'd be seeing that sort of thing on the training track, where he would probably be leading the efforts of the players out there, and that's to that end. It's probably why he's won the captaincy at the club. But I think, as you mentioned, John, we're really not seeing anything terribly different from Reid this year to what we were seeing when he was at Parramatta. And I guess to that end, he's earning somewhere in the vicinity of $700,000 a season, from what we're led to believe. So it's a big investment there. And I guess the other thing too that would be interesting from the Bulldogs is how well Jeremy Marshall-King has performed for the Dolphins when he's been. I know he's missed some games through injury, but he's always a big inclusion when he's part of the Dolphins lineup in any weekend. So, interesting call that they made there. Now, the one thing I'd like to get a final take on, now that the dust has settled and we're maybe calmed down a little bit, is the officiating from yesterday. And I want to throw to you first, 40, because we were highly critical of what we witnessed yesterday. Have you settled down at all today?
Well, I think you're speaking. Fired up? I think you're speaking for yourself when you say calm down, because I have not calmed down. I was just on the other podcast I do with the other fellas, the Parrot podcast with Hamish, and Birdie, and I ripped in again because I thought Liam Kennedy had a very ordinary game as the main official, but like we always say, 60s, we allow a certain amount of latitude because of how frenetic and how difficult rugby league is to adjudicate on the fly. So yes, I didn't think he had a good game, but again, it's a hard job. I can cop that. He's going to have bad games, fair enough. Didn't like the 8-2 penalty count, obviously. Didn't like some of the calls, but you wear them. What the bunker is and isn't doing consistently for both Parramatta and well beyond Parramatta. You watch games as a neutral, and I've been more invested in the NRL this year than I have been for years. It's been a really great, year for the code. There's been so many great teams rising up, and the parity has come right back to the field without feeling like they've neutered teams in order to do it. Teams are stepping up. That's great. But watching these games, and when the bunker intervenes, it is mind-boggling. And that's what really concerns me is live whistle, hard, make mistakes, okay, cop it. When you have the benefit of reviews and all the different camera angles and all the technology and the chance to take your time and get the decision right, and they are producing what they produce, there is something rotten in the state of Denmark. This needs to be fixed. Not the fact that we had to try taking office in those circumstances, it boggles the mind, because what do you want the Eels to do in that scenario? What is Bailey Simonson meant to do? He didn't stop in the line. He pushed through. By pushing through, he didn't alter his line to impact the defender. The defender chose to be lazy and push him, and he got punished for it.
Well, Clint, I don't know. Can you top 60s going with a Shakespeare quote in his venting?
Look, you're quoting the greatest writer of all time there, so it would be outright ludicrous for me to suggest that I could outdo you there. But in that being said, and just to add to what has been said, I don't know if this is a direct quote. I might be paraphrasing, but when the video ref said, the bunker said, in our opinion, Carl Alawapu would have been able to tackle Micah Sivo, my response was, okay, video ref. Yeah. Okay, sure thing. Yeah. Good one.
Have you played a tackle of football in your life? Hello?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with when you take the rules beyond black and white and you allow interpretations to happen. We saw this way back in the day when obstructions used to be given more latitude for the interpretive side of things. There was stuff that was let go that, in our opinion, they wouldn't get there. In our opinion, they would have got there. And it's we mustn't have played the same game. And that was the case here. Anyone that's regardless of the mechanics, because Olapu was nowhere near Sivo, so he was never going to get to him in the first place. And Bailey Simonson did nothing wrong. Regardless of those mechanical aspects of it, anyone that saw that head-on vision of Sivo charging for the line, that was the hardest I've seen Sivo run, and he'd had a good game running hard. That was Tedesco 2020, was it? Was that when he buried Teddy at the old SFS? Whoever was getting in his way was getting murked. They weren't getting back up. So I don't know. Like I said, regardless of the actual mechanical aspects of it and the common sense part of it, that front-on shot told you everything you need to know about anyone trying to stop Sivo in that particular instance.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was just in hysterics. Like I was I wouldn't have been laughing if it had been a game-determining decision. The fact that there was that, it was pretty much over. That's what led me to be, finding that quite amusing. Clint, any words that you want to add to that at all?
I was exactly the same. As I said, I met it with a degree of sarcasm and lightheartedness for exactly that reason. But it's in isolation. Those types of things, when they happen from time to time, they're not problematic in and of themselves. But it's where it doesn't fill you with great hope when the game is in the balance, And maybe it might have been a little bit of a. I don't want to necessarily suggest that they're making decisions in and around the scoreboard per se, but perhaps they were, But Forty said it perfectly when it's, did these people play the same game that we've played and that we've watched growing up and spend the better part of our lives watching, because it just seems so out of touch with people who do understand the game through that, I guess, through those eyes and through that lens, that people who are paid to officiate on just cannot comprehend or connect those dots. It was really quite frustrating after the fact.
And you boys are right that clearly it was never going to cost Parramatta the game, and I'm sure there were some pundits that had total points and margins that were furious about the outcome. But on an individual level, that could very much cost Mike Acevo the Ken Irvine medal. That is a significant accolade in his career that he can put down on a notch, and it might come down to one try because that's the backs are just so prolific at scoring these days, and he's got a couple of crazy South Sydney bar backs on his tail. Yes, he has a +2 lead at the end of this round on the back of the try he scored, but he should have had a +3 lead. And nothing. And I don't think Graham Annesley actually addressed this in his round debrief. I don't think he did. I saw some talk about the two scrum penalties, the Newcastle Broncos game, and then Mitchell Moses against the Bulldogs, obviously against Burton, and the differences there. Because I think he believed, and I actually agree from there, that in the context of that Newcastle game, that the Broncos should have been sin bin because that was a cynical penalty with one play left in the game. Whereas in the Parramatta game, that was very much a different context at halftime. With the Dogs looking for a trick play. But yeah, didn't address it. And that, again, Annesley has done plenty of, sort of addressing the bad stuff that's happened to the rest, but that one was so on the nose that you really had to, you should have talked about it, I think.
Look, from you mentioned about the punting. Look, I don't put money on Parramatta. You boys have me banned on being able to do that sort of thing.
And it's not being lifted
you'd be hung,
soon,
drawn,
mate.
and quartered if you did, man. If I find out.
But in the tip and the preview, I tipped 52 over 52 and a half total match points. Now, a converted try there would have taken it to 52 total match points, and who knows what might have happened from there. But as it turned out, I came up short by 6.5 points on the tip there. So anyway, we move on. Moses and Junior called into the Origin squads. Well, Junior named again, and Moses called into the squad. Deserved, fellas?
Yeah, look, I think so. And listeners would know over the past few weeks, I've absolutely rammed home the point that I'm a Parramatta man first, and I still am. That hasn't changed because Mitch has been selected. And it's a very bittersweet moment because of that. But what an accolade for our halfback and playmaker to be selected again. He was very harshly judged on his one Origin appearance to date, which he did. Played 70 minutes with a fractured back, had 2 try assists, kicked for plenty of meters as well in a game that I think they only lost by 2 points in the end, gents.
Mm-hmm.
My memory's a little hazy on that one, but and he largely achieved, if we're using try assists as the metric, what the supposed golden boy, the faultless golden boy Nathan Cleary achieved in 8 Origins. He was very harshly judged on that one appearance, and I go into this. I'm a little bit frustrated with Freddie because he's forced my hand into, because we've just had Junior in the last few Origin games. It was just a case of he's just got to make his hit ups and make his tackles and come through unscathed, and it's all good. Now that we've got a playmaker amongst it, damn it, Freddie, I have to be cheering them on now, don't I? You've done us over with that one. I'm very frustrated with him for doing that.
He didn't do Mitch any favours, much the same way he didn't really do Cleary any favours by leaving only one half that can really kick and organise.
Absolutely, and he's going to be targeted and rushed because of that. And that sort of dovetails into what I was about to suggest is I go in with a lot of apprehension with this as a Parramatta supporter, and the wider rugby league community already having a particular, I guess, viewpoint towards Mitch Moses, and I'm just worried that he's being. I can't put it any lighter than this, gents. But I don't want him to be set up for a fall and scapegoated for what might be mission impossible up there for New South Wales, trying to tie the game up in a hostile Queensland environment. And I don't want Mitch to be I guess the direction of frustration from other clubs fans and use that to perpetuate a narrative that he's not there and that he's not good, that he shouldn't be there and he's not good enough, because he is good enough, and this is a very well deserved accolade. And I'm hoping that he can go up there and have a whale of a game and prove all of those doubters wrong.
Yep. John, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, like Clint said, he has been set up for failure. He's replaced the golden boy. I hate saying that too, because Nico is a good guy like that, and I'm not trying to be derogatory when I say or derisive when I say golden boy, but he is the media darling right now. He's a wonderful rugby league story, and they've really latched onto him, trying to build him up as the face of the game. And Mitch has come in and wrecked up the place by taking his place. So anything less than a man of the match performance, it feels like they're going to say, well, Nico could have done better, or or something like that, or Adam Reynolds could have done better. So Mitch has to have a whale of a game here, unfortunately. And while I do think the team is better, the balance of the team is better, I also think that there are some still head-scratching decisions. Reg can consider himself desperately unlucky. At least they picked a good young forward to replace him. We're still I do like Stefano. He's been plagued by injuries, but he's got all the talent in the world. So between him and Spencer Leniu, I'm okay if either of those guys getting the nod over Reg, because at least you're building. Still got issues with the team. I don't like having only one proper middle on the bench. I know Cam Murray's a fantastic player, but he and Yo are not Origin props. They're outstanding players in their own right, and they bring plenty to the table, but they don't win the middle the way that you need to in Origin in rotation. So got big misgivings about that, and just hope our boys have good games and get through it. And for Mitch, I say that he has to have a good game and win the game, unfortunately, to get any degree of respect that he will deserve from this.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little bit about the overall Origin selections a little bit later in this podcast. I've just got a couple of things to say on it. First of all, congratulations to both players. Congratulations to Mitch that he's won that recall. It's well deserved. To Junior, that he's really becoming one of the incumbent New South Wales players. So that it's, whilst I'm not saying his selection is guaranteed, he's been able to work his way into a position with his performances in Origin that he's one of the first that Freddie calls on. A bit of advice for Mitch: go low on Tino. Don't attempt to be standing up when you tackle him, because we know what happens there with if you do go in on the tackle. And
that's something we didn't talk about from our game too. How did Mikey get charged for his raised one? And he actually was facing a potential ban, or still is. He has to enter the guilty plea. How did he cop the charge? And then Tino and Jared were Hargraves don't. I don't understand this game.
Yeah, no, I have no idea whatsoever. Look, what I will say about Mitch is that his demeanour has completely changed in the game. You saw before the game, in the interview, you saw when he was out on the field and waiting for the kickoff, you just saw that little confident nod to his teammates, like, I'm ready for this. You could see in the manner that he was playing, even when the kick pressure was being applied, he was just calmly getting those kicks away, and quite a variety of kicks that he was aiming for as well this week. You know, he was putting in the low kicks to the corner, the high kicks from the distance. So, and I got to see that close up on Saturday at the Blue and Gold Alliance barbecue, and I relayed this story to you last night. I think after the game, John, that I asked Mitch Moses why the Eels would beat the Bulldogs, and he basically very calmly answered, because we're a better team. And it was just that, you know, it was a
assured self-confidence,
straightforward, assured answer. And I remember thinking to myself, that's a pretty good reason why we're going to win. So,
yes, sir.
Now, I want to go from there into the impact that those selections cause, because we've just had team list Tuesday. We're about to play this match against the Sea Eagles without both Moses and Junior, and I want to mention this again now because I've just written about it. The Eels are the only team that go into any of the pre-Origin games, the games before the round before Origin matches, where teams have to stand players down that have been selected. Every team except for Parramatta gets a bye in one of those rounds. That's 16 clubs receive one of those byes in those stand down Origin weekends. Parramatta does not.
And
not one.
That includes teams like the Warriors that don't have Origin representation.
Yeah, even the Warriors get a bye. There are 5 clubs which receive 2 byes across those 3 weekends. 2 byes. Now, I can look at that and go, yeah, that's fair enough. It's the Broncos, it's the Storm, it's the Roosters. You're looking at some clubs that traditionally have high representation. I think the Cowboys are another one of those clubs there. The Titans are. The Titans. So, you know, they're looking, obviously, this wasn't a quirk of the draw. This isn't something that's random. It's been a definite decision to give teams that have higher representation their buys during these periods. So how is it that with such consideration given that every team except one would get a buy? Now, people have come at me today and said, well, that's because Parramatta don't have higher representation in Origin. Hello, Warriors?
Mm-hmm.
Dragons?
Tigers?
I mean, like, seriously, it's... And the draw was done back last year, so they have no idea back then what the form is going to be like. They don't know what's going to happen with injuries, and at that stage as well, it was just as likely Parramatta would have 3 players in the New South Wales team. They had RCG, who had been the form forward of last year, and who for some reason Freddie wasn't selecting, but he was selected for the Kangaroo Tour. You had Junior Paulo, who was an incumbent. You had Sean Lane, who was considered unlucky to not be selected in the World Cup matches. And I'm pretty sure he was part of that extended Blues squad that Freddie was looking at. So there were at least 3 players in consideration without looking at the claims of the likes of Moses or Gutherson. So people can't come at it and say, well, that's because of Parramatta's lower number of anticipated Origin representatives. No. This is just, I reckon it's been a straight out oversight myself.
Yeah, but regardless of even of that, which it certainly seems like that's the case, there's a discussion of equity or lack thereof in this instance, given that we are the only team that have 0 in this situation, and everyone else has at least 1, if not 2. Completely inequitable. I hope it's something that our football department has raised with the NRL, and when you compound that with some of the other challenges we had at the beginning of this year, playing 3 teams in 3 consecutive weeks coming off the bye, it's almost as though it's painting a picture.
Well, how many? This week, how many Monday public holiday games are there in a season? There's literally a tiny handful. And the Eels Bulldogs is one of the fixed venues for it, or fixed fixtures for it, and yet we still have a 5-day turnaround. They couldn't schedule us for a Sunday. It is, and I know that they pay a lot of money for the algorithm and the formula to make this this draw, but there are some glaring issues of it. Goodness.
Oh, you cannot have a situation where every other team gets consideration in these matches except for one. The club that we follow. Now, as I said, I reckon that there was an oversight because of the sheer number of buys that are occurring across this origin period. Like, it's just, you've got the big numbers of buys happening on the rounds that I'm talking about, where the round immediately preceding the origin match, where clubs would have to stand players down. So they've got, 5 matches across each of those weekends. So in other words, you've got 7 teams that are getting a bye in each of those weekends. And what I think has happened is, first of all, you've had an oversight, and then surely they've actually picked it up and gone, well, it's too late now. That's bad luck for Para. I reckon that's been the mindset. And then hoped that it slid through to the keeper where it wasn't noticed. Well, it is noticed. It's out there, fellas. It's out there, NRL people, and it's not good enough. In fact, it sucks in an extreme way. Like, it's disgusting. And at some point, we have to call them to account for these sorts of decisions, because you know what? There is nothing that they can say that is an excuse for this. They can't talk about the number of representative players. They can't say, well, you know what? We gave you a bye in the last round of the season. Well, you know what? You gave other teams byes that where we were having to play teams coming off their byes where they were rested. I mean, that's what you call the quirk of the draw. A team has to get a bye in that last round. The way that you've worked it out, a team has to get a bye. Now, that doesn't work out too bad for us. Nice. But you can't have a situation where you go, you know what? Every team has to get a bye during this origin period except for one. How does that work out? You can't, because you've got teams that are getting 2 byes during that period. You can't have teams getting 2 byes and a team getting 0. You can't have every team getting at least 1 bye and one team getting 0. It doesn't cut it. It's not good enough. There is no excuse for it. And I'd like to hear what statement they do make, because it would be laughable. Anyway, fellas, we move on. The great mystery about who is going to play in the halves for Parramatta, with Mitch Moses and Dylan Brown missing, has finally been answered. And if you had said to me at the start of the season that halfway through the year we'd have a halves pairing of Daejarn Asi and Ryan Matterson.
Put down the crack pipe, son.
Yeah, drugs are no good for you. Do not involve yourself. So, Clint, in your wildest dreams, did you see this happening at some point in the season?
Well, if it was prefaced to me, I'm like, something must have happened. Is obviously would have been the question I would have asked, and as it turns out, there's quite a bit that's happened. So there would be plenty of Parramatta supporters out there who would there'd be no stranger to the news that Ryan Matterson played plenty of played in the halves plenty during his junior football, and as recently as the under-20s in Parramatta colours, probably some, dare I say, 10 years ago or so.
2014, yeah.
And I'm pretty certain he played junior Kangaroos in the halves as well. So
yeah.
He's no mug in that position, but it has been some time as well. But we don't we don't need to, nor are we looking for him to play a traditional half role. He's not going to be doing the clearing kicks. He might chip in with a grubber 20 meters out or so. What we really need him to be is that good pass link option between Asi and Gutherson, who'll be doing most of the running around and running of the team on Saturday. And Matto's got a really good passing game on top of that. His running game is well noted as well. And hopefully it shores us up defensively on the right edge. I like the idea of Matto matching up against Schuster defensively there, either side of the ball. You feel really confident in his ability to mark up on him. And likewise, you feel really confident in his ability running at him too. Having those big bodies in motion running at that edge is certainly an opportunity for us to attack.
Sorry, continue on.
No, I was just going to finish on the point. Like with Hodgson out, who I assumed would have potentially gone into the 7 and Arthur at 6, at least in attacking formation. He probably would have still defended in the middle and Brendan Hands defend on the edge. It's the best possible team that we can name at the moment. So, it's an odd one, but at the same time, given the circumstances, I don't see a better option.
Yep, and of course we got Joe Ofahengaue, who's hopefully going to play more than 5 minutes in this match, coming in for junior, but going on to back onto Matto. John, we've gone from having probably the fastest halves pairing in the competition to potentially the biggest.
Yeah.
Would that be?
Yeah, well, Daejarn's no midget himself, isn't he? He's got some decent size to him. And then Matto, well, it's kind of like back when Tony Williams used to run around the halves for the Bulldogs. The moderately sized 5'8", going around there. But yeah, I think Clint really hit most of the key talking points there. The big question mark will be game management and clearing kicks, and we know that Daejarn can do at least a bit of that. We saw that against the Bulldogs, which is why I was so happy to see him fully involved and fully incorporated into our systems. They didn't hide him, and that's going to serve him better this week, where he knows he can take the right kicks here and there. Matto, mentioned Clint, nice grubber kick. He had a try assist against Canberra, was it? With a really good grubber kick. So hoping for more of that. And the big thing that you also already talked about is those isolation plays. You put him in ISO up against a half or a centre and create that big mismatch. And it happens to be that Schuster happens to be pretty good size, but has question marks defensively. And you post him up against Schuster, it causes him to have to make the one-on-one, and suddenly short ball passing lanes open up, offloads open up. Bryce Cartwright's got a great feel for those things. He times his runs really nicely. He'll always be on the ball. And then, even Quinton Gutherson can potentially be looming around for that offload off Matto. So there's going to be options down the right. Guffo's going to be a big feature on both sides, especially the left. Him and Asi linking up, looking for Mike Acevo, I think is going to be one of our sort of bread and butter plays this week. And the other player that I think could be the big beneficiary as this forward pack gets really healthy, and I say that with Ryan Matterson playing the halves, but from what we saw last week, Brendan Hands, he could be up for a big game here. He went for nearly 100 on the ground. He was constantly probing, looking for forwards on the front foot. Against Manly's pack, and with, Reg, Joe, Ogden, all those boys in good nick, he could have a big game here.
Would you say Hands outplayed Reid Marnie last week?
Oh, without a doubt. And look, Reid had a vastly improved game compared to the first time these two teams met. He was on full tilt in that game, trying to win the game single-handedly. But even so, the knock on Hands last night yesterday afternoon was a forward pass and that defensive miscommunication between him and Junior. Aside from that, he was very good. Called upon to play 80 minutes and just does the job. So I said this to the boys in the other podcast, I don't think anyone's going to have him in Rookie of the Year contention for the Dally M. He hasn't got the profile to support that sort of thing, unfortunately, but he is having a really, really good rookie campaign.
Well, it might just get him the Rookie of the Year for the Eels.
Oh, yeah. I think he is. It's not lay down Mazaire, but he's certainly the strong front runner here.
Oh, I think there might just be a bit of a space behind him.
There's a fair gap. Yeah, fair gap.
Yeah. Look, just my 2 bobs worth here with this. I think I'd like to think that the Eels put a focus on getting those set completions this week, because I don't want to see Daejarn or Ryan or even Clint Gutherson kicking from 30 metres out from our own line. I think, you know, I don't want us to be turning over cheap possession in our halves.
This is a bad game to be chasing early points to be down 2 or 3 tries. If you keep the game within arm's distance or arm's reach distance, you can manage it. You can get there and win this game, but if Manly explode out the block, it's going to be very tough sledding.
Yep. And, of course, the other thing is, too, that this selection didn't surprise in that, you know, there was Gutho joked, and we can now say joked at the press conference that
I'm not so sure.
He was going to play halfback. What we know about Brad Arthur is that he doesn't like to disrupt other positions to solve a selection dilemma in another. And as you say, John, he doesn't like to weaken one position in an attempt to strengthen another.
Yeah, exactly.
And the less disruption that he causes to the overall balance of the team, the better, so that you're far better bringing in a player into the position that has a missing player than it is to swap people around out of the positions that they're comfortable in, out of the combinations that they're developing. And we're certainly seeing combinations that are developing out on the edges. And to that end, I guess that's part of the reason for the improved form of the likes of Bryce Cartwright and Bailey Simonson this year in their respective positions. Now, just moving on, we had some confirmation this today, I think it was, with the injury list news from the Eels about Wiremu Greig, who is now slated to return in, about 6 weeks?
Round 22, I believe. Yeah, 6 weeks.
Yeah, something like that. Now, I didn't really want to talk about this before because if I have a conversation with a player about an injury, it's not my place to then put that on TCT, because my policy has always been that it's best for any updates like that to come officially through the Eels site, and where it's approved by, where any comments that maybe have been made by doctors, any mail from doctors is then confirmed and then placed on their site, on their official site. But I did have a chance to have a quick chat with Wiremu on Saturday afternoon, and he confirmed to me then that his injury wasn't as bad as what was first reported, and that the operation was a little bit simpler than it might have been, and that as a consequence of that his rehabilitation time would be faster. Now, he didn't give me any timetable. He just said he'd be back sooner than what people were saying. And now we've had that confirmation through the Eels that will be 6 weeks. And I guess, fellas, all we can say is that's good news.
Seriously good news. And assuming, knock on wood, there aren't further long-term injuries, Brad Arthur's got a hell of a selection conundrum ahead of him at the back end of the season, because that bench, I mean, Hands, Ofahengaue, Wiremu, and then I suppose one of Cartwright or Matterson, whichever one isn't starting. And then you're talking about guys like Ogden and Makatoa and Dory, who are doing tremendous jobs right now, like seriously good jobs. Andrew Davey, who we talked about earlier, they're surplus to requirements in a fully fit team. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I don't want to say too much on that, because I'd like that situation to eventuate.
Yeah, so, we don't need the old 60s black magic going on top of that one. So
that's it. I've got my hand on a wooden cabinet at the moment, just to make sure that I'm not going to.
You better be triple knocking it.
Hang on. I don't know if you can hear the knocking in the background.
Yeah, we can hear it.
Yeah. So look, now I want to throw to you here, 40, which is the New South Wales Cup. You've just done the team list. Our stocks are horribly thin in New South Wales Cup.
Yeah.
Last weekend, I think we had something like only 4 players who were on the top 30 listing for the Eels that were running around in New South Wales Cup. A couple of development squad players on top of that. But apart from that, it was second tier and Ron Massey Cup players that were called up that ran out in the blue and gold last weekend. I don't know that it's improved too much this week because we have a second rower in Dan Keir who's playing 5'8".
Look, Dan is a goer. He'll give it everything he's got, but there is no world in which you can tell me he is a 5'8".
No. And he's playing 5'8" outside Jordan Rankin. So I want to throw to you, John. I mean, is this they're just having to ride out this time? I mean, is it a case of not only just not putting expectations on them to get a win, but not judging them too harshly?
Oh, look, for the team that's there, I 100% agree right now. Now, judging the team is separate to the paradigm of roster building. And look, part of this could be, if you have a chance to do a deep dive with the football staff and the circumstances behind it, the timing of like different waves of talent. And now this current SG Ball and Jersey Flegg team are probably going to become the core you'd think of the Cup team moving forwards. But right now the timing doesn't line up well. But that could be a factor. But there might be need to be a bit of a paradigm shift, because I think at full strength, obviously now factoring that Jake Arthur's no longer in the team, we're a bit weaker in the halves. At full strength, start of this season, we had a very good Cup squad, and for the most part, they played sort of at that level. There were a couple of bad games here and there, but they had some good runs too. But I think maybe we sort of underestimated attrition and the importance of having an even deeper Cup squad, guys that go down to Ron Massey but are closer to the Cup level players, which will that will come when you start having Jersey Flegg classes filling out your roster. But yeah, looking at this team, it is tough sledding for them, and that's why we're not too critical, because the back line up until this week, where you get a notable inclusion back in Wanga Blake, they were largely a Ron Massey Cup back line, and the spine is a Ron Massey Cup spine for the most part. You're playing forwards at 5'8". You've got a centre at fullback. You've got Manny Luke, who's doing a good job, but he's not a frontline sort of NRL prospect.
Yeah, and Clint, of course, the converse of that is the hope that's coming through in the Jersey Flegg. And I just want to run through a few names before you come in with comment. But this week in the Jersey Flegg team, we have Richard Penasini, who's on the wing, Arpa Twiddle, who's at 5'8", Joshua Lynn, who's at halfback, Patrick Spence, who's at dummy half, Lance Fulima at prop, Charlie Geimer in the back row, Saxon Pryke at lock, and Sam Tuivasa coming off the bench. So you've got just a surge of SG Ball talent that are in the Jersey Flegg team, the majority of them in the starting lineup of the Jersey Flegg team. That must give you great hope for where the club is heading there, Clint.
We've said it all throughout the year. It's very much a reflection of the direction that the club is going, and likewise that I guess that that junior base that's coming through, and those being a development club, I should say, being a core part of our identity. Well, this is the next crop that completely reflects that. And gents, I'm really interested to see how Charlie Geimer goes in the back row in this grade. I know he had a handful of games at centre in Flegg last year with a couple of mixed performances. So I'm wishing him all the best. He obviously made the back row position his own in the SG Ball there, and he's probably of that squad, at least of who we expected to play Flegg this year following the SG Ball season. He's probably the last of sort of that core group who hadn't played yet that now comes into the squad. So I'm wishing him all the best and hoping that he goes out there and has a big one. It's fantastic for the club, the more of these guys that are coming through and getting these types of games under the belt, because it's so important to build those games and build that momentum going into another off season, where hopefully for a lot of them, they're having their first or second full time off seasons with the club, and with professional full time contracts.
Yeah, and just to that end, I believe that the delayed selection of Charlie Geimer, I think he had an injury at the Might have been coming out of the final, but he hadn't been selected as yet due to injury, I believe. So good to see him back out there on the field, and also running out there in a Jersey Flegg team that's probably had a bit of a tough time the last few weeks, and they'd be looking to bounce back this week. Okay, fellas, we now move on to NRL news. And first of all, we've touched on it before, but let's get stuck into the origin changes. I'll just run through those. So for New South Wales, we've got the ins of Moses, Cook, Mitchell, Utoikamanu and Robson, and the outs of Cleary and Coruscant, obviously due to injury. Crichton back to the reserve list, and Tavita Pengai Jr. and Hines both being dropped from the squad. For Queensland, we've got Gilbert, Arrow and Cobbo out with injury. Fodawaker to the bench, Nanai into the starting pack, and Coates onto the wing in place of Cobbo. So I'm going to throw to you first, 40. You've already touched on some of your concerns as far as New South Wales are concerned. Have you got anything else that you want to add to that at this early stage?
Yeah, I think Hudson Young's probably lucky to hold his spot. I think that Liam Martin, obviously he's coming with that concussion concern, but he's capable of playing 80, and he could have taken that edge spot pretty comfortably. Had a hell of a game in game one. In my books, I probably would have gone for a Hines-Moses combination. That way you're presenting Queensland with two options that can run, kick and pass. Luai obviously is the incumbent and holds his spot for that reason. But I don't like in Clubland, I would have no issues with a Moses-Luai combination. I think that's great balance in Clubland. But as we've seen with this, quote-unquote Penrith combination situation, it just doesn't translate to Origin well. You don't get away with the same sort of leverages and opportunities at the higher level that you do in Clubland, where you can control the flow of the game a lot easier. So not a huge fan of that. I do like.
Can I just jump in? And because it's interesting that you spoke about how it doesn't translate well to the Origin arena. The interesting thing too is that we've had critics wanting to rip into Mitch Moses, and suggest that some of those players that are, unfortunately missed out, who it hasn't, as we're concerned, hasn't translated well to Origin, their club form. And you've got these critics of Moses saying that his form was against lower opponents in the NRL.
Never mind the wins against Penrith and South Sydney, where he spearheaded incredible victories.
Correct. I mean, it's interesting. Look, it doesn't surprise with some of the critics. One of them, of course, today was a shock jock that has a well-known hatred for the Parramatta Eels. I don't even want to mention his name anymore. He should be embarrassed by his takes.
Look, on the team 60s, I'm neutral on the dummy half situation. I'm not against having two dummy halves. We don't have the luxury of having a Ben Hunt and a Harry Grant to be that dynamic duo, but Reece Robson is a good player. And Damien Cook, look, Cookie, he's one of those guys, again, where his game is so well suited for Clubland, where your forwards can consistently dominate and he gets on the front foot. Last time he was in Origin, I thought he was pretty ordinary. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. He was doing 360 pirouettes and losing track of where his halves were. He's got to be better than that this time.
Yeah. You've got to have an elite passing game at this level. You've got to have that ability to deal with the unexpected, because Origin is all about the unexpected, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's funny. We have to expect the unexpected. That's basically what it is in Origin, that ability to think on your feet. And it's not saying that he's devoid of that in any way, shape or form. It's just that he's never really shown that that's his go. I mean, he's got an elite running game, but we're probably seeing less and less of that, aren't we, over the years?
Yeah.
Would you say?
He's not as dynamic as he used to be, 100%. No.
So, and you know what? To an extent, he's got like a serviceable game in terms of distributing the ball. His team needs him to do that, but I don't know that he creates the sort of opportunities that he used to in the past. But look, we'll back him as New South Wales supporters to get the job done. Clint, any takes that you want to add to the Origin selections?
Well, you just touched on there, gents. In Origin, we want to expect the unexpected, and to me, you need to be selecting players that do exactly that. And Queensland have nailed that since day dot, and they continue to nail it to the present day. I'm interested actually in your thoughts, and sort of going to pose a question to you here. If everyone was fit, who would you pick as your halves? Because my answer to that question, and noting what has already been said about the club combinations, and I've long been against that modality of thought since it's been presented and adopted across the wider rugby league community. If everyone's available for New South Wales, yeah, Cleary's my halfback. Mitch Moses is my six.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Forty and I have definitely thrown that out there in the past. But I've for the better part of the last 2 or 3 seasons, that's who I would have gone with, because you certainly got a running thread in Mitch. You've got a pseudo running thread in Cleary. You've got the two of the best kicking games going around in the rugby league world there. And likewise, they're both pretty good defenders for halves, all things considered. I think they're both built for that arena, and it would be very interesting seeing them playing alongside each other. Obviously, that we don't have the opportunity for that, but I bring that up as well because much like you were touching on there with the selection of Luai, I just don't think he's the type of player for this arena. And given that Cleary isn't available, like 40, I would also have gone with Hines at 6, Moses at 7, for exactly those reasons. Players that can just keep asking questions and have more than one trick in their bag, and 40 also touched on this earlier in the podcast, but I'm very much a big fan of in this type of football, at least 2 middles on the bench, and personally, if it were up to me, Isaiah Yeo, I must preface when I say this, Isaiah Yeo is a fantastic player. But personally, I think if you're wanting to mix things up a little bit, and to ask those questions and expect the unexpected, Cameron Murray's probably my New South Wales 13, because he's got that little bit more leg speed than Isaiah Yeo's got, and likewise he's just as effective, if not more effective, link man on any given day. And I think when you have halves that can continuously ask questions, and you've got the passing threat of Murray through the middle third there as well, the pass run threat of him, I just think it opens up a lot more opportunities attacking wise for New South Wales. And likewise, it creates that extra second of space when that's happening that allows those halves to unlock the outside backs. Guys like Trebojevic and Latrell Mitchell are already going to be heavily marked, but you give either of them an inch of room and they turn it into something. And I think with those types of combinations, were they available or, were they picked, it might have just made New South Wales a little bit more potent.
Look, I'm now interested in what you said about that being your half and 5'8" combination, because on reflection, I'm surprised that that's never been raised before.
Yeah,
now,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
The idea of having 2 halfbacks.
I can see the value in that because of what could then be thrown from either side of the field, because each player is quite confident at playing each side of the ruck. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't necessarily have to tie them down to one side of the field or the other. If that was a club combination, I'd have some concerns that we'd see something similar to the Corey Norman, Mitch Moses dilemma that Parramatta faced, where you had 2 players that were essentially the dominant half. But I think in an Origin arena, it becomes a different story altogether and would probably work in 3 matches. If it went longer than 3 matches, there would probably be some issues. When it came to who would I select, like if I wasn't going with that, but no, you know what? See, I was content with once the team had been selected, where they were going with Cleary and Luai, I'd like them to keep the combination for the series. and give a combination an opportunity to win a series.
I've had
If you then
three
said, like,
years,
if New South Wales to lose this series 2-1 or 3-0, and then it came time to naming the team next season, given that we know that Fittler pays no attention to form, and we know that because he completely ignored the claims of different players last year. So if he's selecting the team that he believes is going to win, I would then go away from that pairing next year. And I would be looking at another pairing, be it Moses and Hines or whatever the case may be. But I would have stuck solid with Cleary and Luai for this series because I don't like chopping and changing unless you're forced to. And I know we know that he was forced to this particular series. But, so, look, I guess given that Cleary's injured this year, I would make a call next year based on what now happens for the rest of this series. Like if Moses is able to produce like we think and hope that he will produce and that he's able to help engineer a New South Wales win, I would hope that they would consider your option there, Clint. And the other thing too that you raised about Isaiah Yeo, look, I'm a big fan of Isaiah Yeo. I'm gonna say to you, if you didn't have him in the starting lineup, you would surely have him on the bench, wouldn't you, Clint? If he wasn't selected.
Well, this is my conundrum, and going back to the points that 40 was making, and I'm absolutely an advocate of this as well. I like two real genuine middles on my bench, and in my selection world, I kind of think it's an either. It's one or the other when it comes to Murray and Yeo. And just because Cam's got that little bit more leg speed, he's who I'd go with. Now, as I said, Isaiah Yeo is a fantastic player, and he's absolutely deserves to be in this team. But tactically, the way that I personally would want to attack the game would be with as much leg speed as possible. And I want some real complementary body shapes making up my middle third defenders. I want at least one player capable of playing big minutes. I want, ideally two, ideally all of them, really. I mean, when we're talking about the best of the best here, more often than not, the middles who are selected for the team are playing at least 50, 55 minutes for their club sides every week. But, I like having the leg speed of someone like Murray, and who, for many years has been the catalyst to opening up our edges defensively, being that first pass option off the ruck and linking in with the likes of Cody Walker and Latrell Mitchell. But likewise, I'm a big subscriber to two genuine starting props and two genuine bench props, just to keep the heat going. In those high intensity games, I want 20 real quality minutes, and depending on the play, maybe someone for like Payne Haas, I might keep him on there for 30 minutes. But the rest of the middles that are sort of rotating through, I want them to maintain the rage. I want them to keep going. I want as much leg speed either side of the ball as possible. So obviously, I mean, when to put that in more black and white terms, I want our middles absolutely chewing it up when they're hitting the ball up, chewing the meters up. That is. And defensively, I want as much line speed as possible. And to maintain that type of energy, you need to be able to rotate your middles pretty regularly. And for the high intensity arena that Origin is, that's how I would personally go about it. And when I sort of think that through, that means that I get stuck in a position of one or the other when it comes to Cam Murray and Isaiah Yeo. And it sounds kind of weird to say that initially. But backwards rationalizing after I guess my thought process behind that, I choose one or the other because of the style of football that I would personally want to play there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll agree to disagree there around the Isaiah Yeo, because as 40 knows, I'm a massive fan of Isaiah Yeo for many years. I'm not a religious person, but I was praying to the football gods that somehow Parramatta was able to. But now, just moving back to club football and to a decision which impacts the Parramatta game, which is that we've got Arthur versus Arthur this week when the Eels take on the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles with Coach Brad Arthur, who again we congratulate for clocking up game number 244 in charge of the Eels, and it was a victory. And he is now the longest tenured coach in the history of the Parramatta Eels. So well done to BA there. And for the first time now this week, he is coaching a team against his son, Jake. Now, he's had that close association with his own son through the local junior coaching. And then, of course, as Jake has been in the full-time squad at Parramatta for a number of years now until he's moved across to Manly. Now he coaches against him. You wonder what the conversations have been like at home this week. But Jake is the starting half for Manly. He's earned that spot ahead of some other contenders. Those people, I just want to say, those people who used to constantly say that no other club would select Jake Arthur or pick Jake Arthur up on their roster. Well, look, there you go. He's switched to Manly, and he's already played a game off the bench, and now he's the starting half with DCE off to Origin. Something that he would have been doing for the Eels had he stayed at the Eels with Mitch being selected for Origin this week. And you know what? Those people would have been criticising BA for selecting him in first grade. You've now got Anthony Seibold selecting him in first grade. He had offers from other clubs over the last couple of years. He eventually took that Sea Eagles offer. Congratulations to him being in first grade. I can be pleased for Jake, but I'll be cheering against his team this weekend because we want the Eels to win. Fellas, your thoughts? Jake starting for the Sea Eagles against his father's team. Interesting situation there, John.
Well, it's crazy when you think about that. We're one game removed from Brad Arthur's incredible milestone game being against his own son. Like, that's how close it was. It could have been the game this week, save for, the bye scheduling and whatnot and a couple other things. But, yeah, and in another sort of dark cosmic sort of humour going around, Jake naturally making his starting debut for Manly against Parramatta in a game when Mitchell Moses is out of action because of Origin. All these things sort of coming together and intersecting that just like make for that much more fitter for the game. Well done to Jake. Hope he has a good game. Hope Manly suck. That's the vibe I'm going in. Obviously it's good for him to be out of the. It's so sad to say, but the toxic situation he found himself in at the club on account of the lunatic fans. Because you look at him, and anyone that watched not just Parramatta play but actually watched a bit of Reggie's knew that he was one of the premier backup halves in that grade. So,
John, can you believe there were still people on social media that when after Daejarn debuted and had a great game for the Parramatta Eels on debut, that wanted to stretch it to say this is an example of players that Jake was keeping out of first grade and that his father was keeping out of first grade because of Jake.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. People are crazy, unfortunately.
I was stunned, and I can't believe that people wouldn't just go, like, not even be referencing it because Jake's not with the club anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Daejarn had a great game on debut. Just congratulate the bloke
to celebrate his
celebrate him. You don't need to put someone else down. And it's wrong to, it was erroneous, the comments that are being made, right? So, but you don't need to put someone else down to congratulate another person.
No, sir.
So, But anyway, Clint, your takes on Jake getting that debut starting position against Brad for the first time this in their lives?
Well, just to add to the end of that, obviously there's some people who feel like they need to close some type of loop there, wrongly so, I might add, because anyone who's been watching any New South Wales Cup the last 12 months will know how well Jake had been playing in that grade and how effective he'd been. In particular this year, he led every metric that a half could lead in that grade. And geez, it would be handy to have him on our side this week as opposed to be playing against him. Nonetheless, the way that it stands is Jake will be playing against Brad for the first time in his life, and I couldn't echo what you gents have said more. In that, I wish that he has a great game, and the Manly are absolutely diabolical around him. I hope that he goes out there and goes about his business to I guess just show that he deserves to be in this grade, because he is capable of playing in this grade, and he played a number of good games for us as well. So but ultimately I care about us getting the W, and I'm sure it makes for interesting text conversation now that Jake's moved out of the family home this week. And maybe they're not saying anything and they're just waiting until full-time Friday, but I'm sure there'll be a father-son embrace at the end of the game as well. And I hope that the Parramatta fans, when his name are read out, are respectful, and likewise just as respectful every time he touches the ball.
I've got my suspicions there around some people, but let's move on. The Dragons, have they finally come up with a solution to their coaching woes, where Shane Flanagan will be taking over as their coach? I'll throw to you first, Clint, on this.
Yeah, it seems that way, and bizarrely so in the last couple of hours. Shane Flanagan seems to have released a personal statement that's an announcement prior to the announcement that he's accepted the position of I don't think we've ever seen that before. And that was done via Fox Sports social media channels. So a little bit weird that that's being removed from the club to do that, but it seems as though they've found their man, or settled on their man. And obviously Shane is a premiership winning coach. He's spent a number of years out of the game in terms of a head coaching capacity. He's obviously had some assistant positions and done his work, his commentary and media work in and around Fox Sports. But we said a couple of weeks ago that we thought it'd be prudent of the Dragons to continue on with Ryan Carr. I think there was even some suggestion of some of that noise coming out of the Dragons playing group themselves. Or at least I'd seen it alluded to online at certain places. But it's definitely a watch with interest one, this, because St. George are in a very, very precarious position as a club right now. And their next move, and I'm going with Shane, is it's certainly an interesting one. I'll be careful with the words that I use there. Given some of the history that Shane has and the reasons that he spent out of a head coaching role, and then likewise the PR damage that has happened to the Dragons brand over the last 2 to 3 years for a number of different reasons. So, that being said, Shane is a very strong figurehead and might be just the personality they need, but it certainly smells of a scenario of, at this particular point in time, the way that I interpret it, the Dragons needing Shane Flanagan more than Shane Flanagan needing the Dragons, because they've decided to pull this lever and touch the untouchable man.
John, in throwing this to you as well, I'm hoping you can answer a couple of questions that I have. First of all, Shane Flanagan, should he immediately step away from Manly? Because, here's the other question. Is it possible for him to focus on his current coaching job if he is that excited about where he's heading to next year? And for someone to put out his own personal press release about how excited he is about being able to link up with the Dragons, and he's with a different club now, and it doesn't matter how much he talks about being grateful to Manly, you'd have to think that his eyes are looking ahead to next year, and that maybe he's not going to do the exact same job that he was going to maybe do for the rest of this season for the Sea Eagles.
For the longest time, assistant coaches would sign on as a head coach and would see out their contract or tender with their current employer, and no one batted an eye. But there's been a big shift, hasn't there, in the NRL recently where signing for another club from the assistant coach role, especially if you're either a really in-demand rookie coach or rookie assistant coach, and or a seasoned vet that had to bide their time looking for their next gig, that you're moving on when you sign, especially because, as we've seen so often, that once you sign for a club from one place to another, you start poaching, you start recruiting, externally from internally, essentially, and it becomes an untenable situation. There's, strictly speaking, in a bubble, there's no reason why Flanagan can't or shouldn't sit out his coaching or assistant coaching contract with Manly if Manly think that he can help the team. But based on what we've seen and based on what we know will probably happen, I'd say that the situation will become close to untenable sooner rather than later. So, and look, on the flip side of that, the Dragons' job is monstrous. He probably needs all resources and time allocated to it as much as he can. So it's probably beneficial for him to get in, to the front office now, start feeling out who he wants to keep, who he needs to get rid of, start recruiting his support staff, his assistant coaches, all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, not just the players. Start feeling out which players he wants to keep, because there are a whole ton of players that have, made a lot of noise about moving on if they didn't get the right coach. Starting with Ben Hunt, you got Jaden Sewer, you got out in the centres, what's his name, Lomax. So there's a lot of egos you either need to massage or kick out. And so maybe it's best for him to move on.
Yeah, we're not talking about him jumping in and taking over the coaching role from now, but basically using the time now to get to know what the setup is there, get to know what changes he wants, what players he wants or doesn't want, without actually being immersed in the weekly grind of coaching. And and taking off my Eels hat and just putting on a completely neutral hat, I just don't see how you can continue on to be the assistant coach at a club when you are going to be the head coach in another club the next year, a bit of rival of the club that you're at the moment, because every private conversation that you have with a player, away from the ears of other people, like if you're seen talking to particular players at training, people are going to become suspicious. And that rumours and innuendo is going to start. And once you've got that rumour and innuendo going on, that doesn't help anyone. So, I don't think he should continue on as the Manly assistant coach. And you know what? Like, that is a bit unfair on Manly, as much as, I can rejoice in the fact that they would have a disruption to the season. It isn't fair that you lose an assistant coach, because we've seen that assistant coaches have a vital role at the club. We had 1 year where the Eels, when we lost Peter Gentle, and we didn't replace him within the Eels coaching structure until partway through the next season, when David Kidwell came in to take on that role. And, it was most evident that was our worst season that we had. Well, the Eels were under-resourced. Now, I think Manly's got enough issues with resources, with having the private ownership as it is. So, as I said, like I could actually care less if they completely stuff up their season. I'm just saying it is. I can see that it is a little bit unfair that it happens and plays out this way. Finally, fellas, let's wrap this up with a look at one of the big guns in the NRL who just aren't performing like most of the pundits expected that they would. And we're talking about the Sydney Roosters. Given their roster, given the star power that's within their club, they're going pretty ordinarily. And now I know that they got a win over the Eels earlier in the season, but that was one of the strange games to watch. It was probably arguably Parramatta's poorest performance of the year, but we had 2 periods with having a player in the sin bin. So we had 20 minutes of players in the sin bin in that match, and obviously that was costly because tries were scored during those periods. But Clint, where do you see the Roosters at this season, and can they get out of the funk that they're in at the moment?
Like I'm sure most NRL fans like to do. I like to have a play around with the ladder predictor every other week, and try and see where I think teams might pick up some wins and where some losses might take place, so you can kind of get a feel for how the ladder might look at certain points throughout the year going into the semis and beyond. And I've really got no idea about the Roosters at the moment, and I don't think anyone does, including the Roosters themselves. The thing that we do know about them is they're devoid of a true playmaking leader at the club at the moment. Obviously, Tedesco's mixed form has been very well noted this year. I won't touch on that. There's been multiple half options used throughout the year. Beyond the game against us, and maybe a moment or two against the Bulldogs the week previous, Luke Keary's been a real non-factor this year for them. You look at the squad on paper; it's one of the strongest going round. This is not a club devoid of resources or access to anything. Their form is one of the real mysteries of this year, and at this particular point in time, short of the Blues coming out and playing well and James Tedesco having a blinder and that kickstarting his season, I don't really know where it's going to turn around for the Roosters, because one of the things that I've enjoyed about playing them for the last couple of seasons, and we've had some mixed results against them across that time, and they seem to save their best for us every time that we play them, but is that we know that if we can pin them down and keep them inside their own 40, they don't have that big clearing kick option. Sam Walker, who's played the majority of the games within the halves across that period of time, very talented young player. He's obviously out injured at the moment, but prior to that, dropped to reserve grade, told to work on some things. He's not a noted long distance kicker. He's not someone that chews up the meters if they have a bad offensive set. So that if you can contain them, you can work them over, and likewise that if you could target some of those smaller players that they do have, as we had done successfully at Combank Stadium last year when we raced out to that, I think it was like a 28-0 lead or something to that effect when we hosted them at Combank last year. You can remove them out of the game pretty quickly, and I don't know where the road is back for them. They've got some players that have aged, and I don't want to write them off, because this is certainly a champion team and some players that have reached the heights of rugby league. But we saw a couple of years ago when Boyd Cordner had to make the decision to retire. Likewise with Nathan Friend. We're seeing some of those other older boys. I'm not suggesting that they're going to retire. Obviously, Jared Warrior-Hargraves only just extended for another season, but they're not quite as potent or the threat that they used to be. And teams are certainly starting to take it to them now. And maybe those legs are a little bit older and heavier, and can't quite take that challenge being thrown to them every week the way they used to.
Well, let me take what you're saying there, Clint, and throw it over to 40, because one of the things that used to be the strongest feature about Roosters' performances was that their systems worked. And even when they'd be down on troops and they'd have players coming in who, let's face it, they were a higher quality player than a lot of clubs are able to field themselves normally in first grade, but they'd have some quality players who could fill in. But it was their systems, and particularly their defensive systems, that always seemed to stand them in good stead if they were a little bit light on in troops. And it was one of the great features of them as a contender club, is that how competitive they would be even without some big name players. But so, John, I wanted to throw this to you. Have their systems just not updated like they should? Are their players, as Clint has suggested, a year older, and therefore they're not able to produce what's needed for those systems anymore? Or is it a case of other clubs have improved so much and the Roosters haven't gone with them?
Yeah, I don't think all their problems can be pointed at the spine, but a lot can. They've invested so many resources and they capped their Teddy, highest paid fullback in the game, or close enough. I know Tommy's up there as well. Luke Keary, he's still on a marquee contract despite his gameplay starting to fade. And between Teddy and Keary being the two senior members of the spine and both their form dipping significantly in 2023, you start a conundrum. Throw it in with Brandon Smith being, it's too strong and too early to say he's a dud, but he certainly hasn't had the opening season as a Roost that he would have hoped, or the club would have hoped. He's been struggling massively, not just with injury, but, middling form. And then the big one, I suppose, in terms of the long term, Sam Walker, the super rookie who had all the hype in the world, exploded onto the scene with that, big, extravagant cutout passing game, but he just hasn't developed. And I know he's injured right now, and that's, obviously, kept him from doing stuff in the current sort of situation, but his game really hasn't taken any steps forwards. Not in game management, not in long kicking, not in just, constructing different ways to attack an opposition defense. He still goes for the extravagant cutout pass, and teams are starting to clue into it. You've seen a few intercepts this year when he was being picked. And when your spine is failing, and at multiple levels, it's difficult. They've still got a good forward pack. It's not a great forward pack anymore. It's a good forward pack, and that's another thing. Warrior Hargrave still got some juice in the tank, but he's not the sort of army of one he used to be. We've got Lindsay Collins, who was a good forward, but after that, Satili Tupanua, he's decent. Angus Crichton has been away from the game for a bit for his other reasons. So, they're not that good a team now. Like on paper they are, but they're not. It's one of those weird things.
Okay, so let's make a call now. Let's make a mid-season call. First of all, John, do the Roosters qualify for finals football?
It's going to be such a logjam in those final spots that they'll still have a chance. On their form, I don't think they should. So I'll say they won't, but I think it'll probably be closer than I'm giving it credit to because just of how congested the ladder is. You go on a run and win a few games and you can put yourself back in contention pretty quickly.
Yeah, Clint, yes or no?
Yeah, like John there, it is going to be a congested table, and I dare say the minor premiers will probably have the most amount of losses this year that they've had since 2005 when the Eels won it with a 16-8 record. So it certainly keeps them in the hunt, but I see them just fading out. I touched on that. I have a play around with the ladder predictor. I see them just being on the periphery of that 8, and maybe they can get some good performances in and swing the for and against in their favour. But at this point, I see them just missing out.
Well, I'm going to agree that I see them right around the fringe of the ruck of the 8. I'll give them a nudge into it, based on the fact that failure just really isn't accepted down at Bondi, and regardless of whether they just scrape into the 8 or just miss it, they're not going to threaten the competition, and we can expect to be clean out at Rooster Town. I would expect it's just not going to be regarded as good enough. Well, fellas, that brings us to the end of a jam-packed news podcast. And again, thank you to our sponsors, Big Swing Golf at Northmead and Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. And a reminder also that we are there after the big game on Saturday at Combank Stadium. Come and see us for our Instant Reaction podcast up there in Jack's Bar and Grill. We try and make sure that we get there and start about half an hour after the full-time siren. So we'll see you there. Come in for a drink, a feed, plenty of Parramatta talk. And fellas, thank you. Thank you to our listeners for joining us tonight. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.